This video was sponsored by Cepheus Studios, and I'm going to be painting Ripjaws from Ben 10. So it should be pretty apparent that I've already done some preparation on this model. The printing was handled by my GK2s, and I sanded it and put some magnets in and colored it with Chaos Black. Now that we got the formalities out the way, this is Groundeffected. My name could be your dad, and I produce videos weekly for painting models, making things, shooting fire out of stuff, all the kinds of things. But this week it is going to be painting Ripjaws. And to get this started, I'm going to take a series of greys and I'm going to dry brush that all over the base, starting with the darker grey and then moving my way to the medium grey and then obviously the light grey, which is not even grey, it's actually deck tan. And you may be saying to yourself, but why is this going to be a grey base? It's not, so don't worry about that. We'll get back to that in a minute. But for now, I'm going to paint all the rest of the accessories that are on this base. For example, the grass and also the coral. And while I paint that, let me tell you about the sponsor of this week's video, which is Cepheus Studios. And this is a Patreon who creates models for those who love bringing art to life through 3D printing. From intricate characters to fantastical props and environments, every model was crafted with care, creativity, and a deep love for storytelling through form. From as little as just $12 a month, you can receive up to 3 models a month for you to 3D print at home. Go and check out the link in the description that I will leave there for you to go and see Cepheus Studios and show them some love. And now the base is looking suitably fantastic. I'm going to actually want to come back in and add some more details to these parts of accessories that are on the base. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a lighter pink on top of the purple that I put down originally over the corals. The next step would obviously be to add a green on top of the grass, but if you thought that, you would be completely wrong. That is because I'm going to move on to adding the light onto the little symbol thing that is in the base, and also adding a zenithal over the top of the model. This is essentially just white ink sprayed over the top of black in the direction of the light where it is coming from, and this causes or creates a zenithal. And to deal with the green glow of the Ben 10 logo, I'm going to add this technical paint over the top of it, which is Tesseract Glow, and is basically just a fluorescent green. I can now come in and paint the actual outside of that case of that light box thing, and when I'm done with that, I will add a little bit more lighting effects, if that's what I think is actually the next in the procedure, but it might not be. You never know with me. Lucky for us, I did not notice a squirrel out the side of my eye, and I was able to actually do the lighting effects. So what I did the next steps was take some white ink and spray that very carefully into the centers of the figure of 8 thing, if you want to call it that, and then I used some gloss clear to seal everything in and make it look shiny and just different from the base. That way it will stand out from the base. That's the whole point of changing that. Now is the time for me to add that light green that you thought I was going to add earlier, but I didn't. I decided to do it at this time, just to confuse you specifically. And now that all the colors are in their right places, I can now actually tint the base the colors that I want it to be. Of course, the previous actions that I had taken was to dry brush and pick out all of the textures on the base that I wanted to stand out. I'm now going to add some contrast paints over the top of that, which is going to cover up quite a fair amount of that texture, but this is going to tint the colors that I want the base to be, and I can then come back later and add some of that texture back. And with all that thick paint on the base, it's time for me to put it aside to dry while I quickly add the base layers over the top of the skin of this creature. And now that the base has dried, I can come back and add some of those textures back that were lost when I put all of the paints over the top of them. I'm also gonna add a little bit more extra texture just around the edge of where that little badge thing goes in, so that I can add a little bit of this Tesseract glow over the top of that, and also underneath to make it look like the light is actually shining around that thing, a majig. Oh, and I also used a matte varnish to make absolutely sure that the entire base was definitely matte before I added the nice shiny little badge. And as you can clearly see, there is a vast difference between the surfaces of these two parts, making them thus, therefore, and henceforth stand off of each other. Now I need to go back into the skin tones and add some highlights to them, otherwise they would be boring, and so I'm going to do that by using a lighter version of this green color that I'd put over the top. I also threw a tiny bit of white ink into that green color to make sure that the highlights were epically bright on the brightest spots that I wanted the brightest highlights. And now that the majority of the skins is all done on this creature, I can move on to painting his suit. And on the suit, it is pretty much just black, so I'm going to paint it black, and then I'm going to take some bluey kind of greys, and I'm going to spray a highlight over the top of the suit. This was a mistake, because later on I'm going to come back in and need to fix that, and you will see what I mean by fixing that. And now that the suit is at a position where I am happy with how it looks, I can move on to adding the lovely green that is on the fins of this creature. There are a load of green patches on this dude that need to be painted with a solid green before I come back and highlight that green with a brighter green. Speaking of brighter greens, this is the time where I need to add the stripes that are on the insides of his awesome dress. And annoyingly, this is where I made the mistake, because realistically I should have done this layer before doing the highlighted sections, because I needed to come back and clean them up. And to do that, I needed to come back with black. So basically I had to go back to black and redo the entire freaking shading on this dress. But now that I have the legs done, I can essentially stick the legs together so that he stands a little bit stronger on the base, and I can move on to adding the highlights onto those fin pieces, which I'm going to do by turning my airbrush down to a lower pressure and thinning my paints a little bit more than usual. This way I have more control over where that paint is going, because it's not a load of paint coming out my airbrush, and it's a small fine mist which I can then go closer to the model with, and that means that I have more control by doing it this way. Use the same color that I painted his fins with to paint the entire inside of his mouth, including that weird little webbing thing, and making sure that I got that between his teeth, so that when I came back later and picked those teeth out, there wouldn't be any weird light green colors in the middle of that. I am going to shade this though in a very similar fashion to how I shaded the fins as well, but you will see how I do that. I also painted a load of black just into his throat, so that the throat looked like it was a little bit deeper too. Usually I would use a cream white or something of the like to paint the teeth, but as this guy is mostly greens, I figured that using this light green that I used in the dress would really help to sell the effect of keeping everything tied together. I don't really know what I meant by selling the effect. So if you ignore all of that previous sentence, essentially I used a lighter green instead of a cream white in order to paint his teeth. And once the teeth are done, I can move on to painting the Tesseract glow over the emblem on his chest, as well as the light bulb over the front of his forehead, which needed to be suitably glowy. And to dirty up the teeth just a little bit so they weren't as white as they actually currently are, I'm going to spray some skeleton horde into the shadows of them just to make them look a little bit more grimy. And while I wait for the mouth to dry, I can then move on to painting his eyes. And through my research, because I actually don't know this character, I have decided that the color for the eyes is going to be yellow. That's just what I have decided, and we're going with it, whether you like it or not. And with the eyes done, that means I can now move on to the final part of painting this model, which is going to be taking a gloss varnish and painting that all on the inside of the mouth to make it look suitably slimy. When I'm done with that, I can put the model together, and then I can pretty much call this model done. And thus forth, we are now in the ending scenes of my video, which is fantastic. If you have made it this far, I want to say a massive thank you for watching and supporting my channel. As you may notice, I am very close to 100,000 subscribers, unless you are watching after I've got 100,000 subscribers, in which case, let's go for 1 million. I know, that sounds crazy, but hey, I guess you have to have some sort of a goal, otherwise what's the point of anything really? This is obviously the point of the video where I say a massive thank you to my Patreons, because without them I couldn't keep the lights blinding my eyeballs every single week. If you want a color palette for every model that I paint, I post that every time I paint a model, so you will always get one of those, and that is from the lowest tier in my Patreon. If you want to see whips and behind the scenes, all sorts of stuff is in the Patreon. Please go check out my Patreon, and don't forget to go and check out the Patreon that sponsored this video as well, because of course without the sponsors the lights also struggle to stay on. So thank you to the sponsors as well. And this is the part of the video where I get to say my favorite thing, and that is, if you don't like anything you see in this video, or in fact on my channel, I don't care, and you should probably just f*** off.